Well, hello. So today I have with me Krista Tedrow, and she is the owner and founder of a company called No Opportunity Wasted. And I love that because it really describes Krista's life. And she's had a lot of things that she has overcome to be very successful. And I know I'm bragging on you a little bit. I didn't tell you I was going to brag on you. So surprise, I'm bragging on you. But I also think that theme, it not only fits well with her business and her life, but obviously that is a very gospel-centered theme. And really the message of the gospel is that there is, in the kingdom of God, there is no opportunity wasted. And I think we'll get into some of this today. But the truth is, I think one of your main scriptures is that God works all things together for the good of those who love him. And I think that is the essence of no opportunity wasted, is that even in the hard things, God is working and he's doing things. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And a lot of times he works contrary to the way that we think he should work. Almost all of the time, actually. I think that's describes your life, describes much of my life as well. But when we alter our perspective and we begin to see things the way that he sees things, it allows us to cooperate with what he's doing in our lives instead of being resistant to it. So Krista, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's talk about today.
Sure. So perspective, my husband and I have this joke, and we say this to each other a lot, that it's all about perspective. And when we first got married, we had some different ideas and expectations from each other. And I remember he came home one night and I was eating popcorn and I'm sure like playing Angry Birds or something on my phone. And he's like, "So what's for dinner?" And I was like, "Well, I'm having popcorn." And he was like, "Well, that's not dinner." And I'm like, "Well, I guess that's all about perspective because that's what I'm having." So, and so even to this day, that's something we say pretty frequently.
Yeah. I feel like pie could also be an adequate dinner. So
I would agree. Again, it's all about perspective.
Yeah, if it has fruit in it, that's a healthy dinner.
And it has some, yeah, exactly. So it has the things you need. So as I was kind of examining this topic or thinking about that, and as it relates to leadership, the Lord really brought me to Joseph, and his life and how, from a human perspective, and even from Joseph's perspective, many times it didn't always seem like God was working for his good.
For years at a time.
Say that again.
Even for years at a time.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. So I don't know, I guess this is where I kind of like to delve in, and the Lord's just been showing me a lot here. And when we look at Joseph, kind of his story beginning, it talks about how he's got his coat on, his dad favors him. He's, kind of a little bit of a jerk, a little bit of that, like, oh my gosh, really?
Entitled.
Exactly. That guy again. So Joseph is his dad's favorite. It's well known. He gets this coat, and then he has this dream, and he's telling all of his brothers, like, "Oh my gosh, guys, you're going to bow down to me one day." He has another dream. He has a second dream, and dad is around this time. His dad is overhearing it, and he's like, "Listen here, what are you doing, man? Like, you're my favorite, but I don't like what I'm hearing." And in that, Joseph's dream kind of became his devastating blow, or what was intended to the Lord gave him a dream, but it was thwarted and it made everybody jealous. So I think about a 17-year-old running around with all this favor and not knowing what to do with it.
Yeah.
And so anyways, brothers, the story, take him and throw him in a pit. And at that point, Joseph's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to die in here." And it was because of the dream that really is what pushed the brothers over the edge.
Yeah.
And in that, he gets taken, we know he gets from the pit, and he's sold into slavery. So at least he doesn't die. Okay. Yeah. Joseph's there. He doesn't die. And then he's at Potiphar's house. Now, you and I had a discussion the other day where I was like, you know what? I'm just going to be like Joseph. I was talking about having to clean the toilet. And I was like, I will be the best darn toilet cleaner there is. And then you were like, "Well, I have 3 toilets." And I'm like, for a single person, that's a little over the top.
Excessive, it is.
Exactly. But anyway, Joseph, I think about going from the favored person, the favored son, the one that was elevated, to a place where he is a slave and he's literally cleaning toilets. But Joseph is like, hey, you know what? I'm going to do the best I can. And there's a verse there that in Genesis 39:2, and it says, as it turns out, God was with Joseph and things went very well with him. His master recognized God was with him. God saw God working for good in everything he did. And he put Joseph in charge of everything. And God blessed the home of Potiphar, all because of Joseph.
Yeah.
And that really kind of resonated with me, because there's been times in my life where I felt like I was a slave to a certain maybe organization or a certain place in serving the Lord even. And the question that the Lord brought up to me as I was observing this in the Bible and even in my own life, is that Joseph was able to serve in obscurity while he was waiting for promotion.
Yeah, that's so good.
And I think about in our own lives, is your employer, like, are they being blessed because you're there? Because if we have the perspective that, oh, they're just using me, or I can't be effective here, or this place is like a prison or whatever,
yep.
Is God really using you as he would intend to use you? And is your employer reaping the benefit of having you as a
That's really
employee?
good. It's really good.
So this then leads to, okay, so things are going great for Joseph. It's awesome. He's been promoted. The master's put him in charge of everything. Well, then I feel like we get road bumps. So maybe we're in a place where we've recognized and we've changed our perspective. And it's like, you know what, Lord, I had an office with like 0 windows and a ton of kids and hardly any staff. I was supposed to be serving. And I had a message, actually a word from you, that you said the Lord was going to just elevate you and promote you.
Yeah.
So this was 3 years prior, and I remember this word, and I'm sitting in my office in no windows, feeling overwhelmed, and I'm like, yeah, okay, this is coming along.
Yeah.
But
the exact opposite of what you were experiencing. Yeah,
exactly.
Yep.
But I started shifting my perspective, because I was like, you know what, Lord, you purposely put me here for a reason, and I'm just going to do the best that I can. And then I ended up with a little road bump, kind of like Joseph does. Now, the Bible says like Joseph is extremely attractive. I didn't get that trait, but you know what? That's okay.
But you have a great sense of humor. I mean, you more than make up for it. You're very charming. Yeah.
Thank you. I was looking for that.
Yeah, no, we have to rely on our humor.
Exactly. So anyway, in Joseph's instance, things are going really great, and up comes this woman, Potiphar's wife, and Joseph, she really is just like, he's an attractive dude. I want to get with him. Okay. And Joseph's like, dude, your husband put me in charge of everything, but has not given me you. How could I ever do that? And how could you ever do that?
Yeah.
So I think in that moment, Joseph speaks truth to say, hey, that's not okay. And I will not go that route.
Yeah.
And I think with that, the Lord in my own life, there was an experience I was having with a leader in our organization, and I had to speak out and say, you know what, it's not okay. What is happening right now is not right. And things took a drastic turn for the worse for me personally. Yeah. And in Joseph's life, it would seem that way too, because she lies about him, slanders him, and he goes to prison. So sometimes I think in life, things get drastically worse. And in my situation, it did. People were saying that I was sleeping with my boss. People were saying that, I just only had it out for myself and all these things. And the Lord really had to speak to me like, I know and I see.
Yeah.
And in that moment, and in that, long moment, it was like a year, the Lord worked a lot of me out of me.
Yeah.
Because good. When I got to the point where I realized literally the fact that he knows and he sees and he approves, it really freed me from having the need to have approval from man.
Yeah.
And I started to live my life in a very different way with that. So Joseph gets thrown into prison. But interesting here, Genesis 39:20 says, but there in jail, God was still with Joseph.
Yeah.
He reached out in kindness to him. He put him on good terms with the head jailer. Joseph then ends up managing the whole operation, because God was with him, and whatever he did, God made sure it worked out for the best.
Yeah.
So I look at that, and in that situation in my own life, it took a while for the fruition to come, but God was working a bunch of things out for my own good and the good of a lot of others, because they were having challenges with that leader as well. So insert here, Joseph's strolling along, doing his daily duties. He's in charge of all the prisoners, and we know the cupbearer and the wine guy. So Pharaoh's kind of a hot-headed dude, and he's like, whatever these folks have done, he's like, you're going to jail. It doesn't say exactly, but there they are. Yeah. So Joseph's taking a stroll and sees that they're long-faced. And I can kind of, in leadership, I think it's important for us to be perceptive about what's going on around us. And so the fact that Joseph prompted to say, hey, what's going on? I see that there's a concern. So with that, people could be puffed up. And I think 17-year-old Joseph was going about his name, tra-la-la, didn't even know really his brothers didn't like him or have an awareness.
That's really good.
So something had developed in him that he was able to say, hey, what's going on? So they were like, man, we both had crazy dreams last night. So they go on to explain the dreams. And in this, his dream now what was used to devastate him is now going to develop into a promotion eventually. So he has the dream, and then he says, I really want to point this out. Genesis 48, don't dreams come from God? He asked them that, and he said, tell me the dreams. So he acknowledges that he's not the one that is interpreting, or that the dream didn't come from him. Tell me the dreams. So with that, I think he started to develop a little humility.
Yeah, that's really good. And do you think he would have had that humility if he had not spent time in a pit and spent time cleaning toilets?
Yeah, no, I don't. I'd highly doubt that.
Yeah.
I highly doubt that. And the Bible talks about, like, it's not good for you to continuously just have somebody give you compliments all the time. Like, it's not a good thing. So in that time period, his dad, whatever he wanted, he got whatever he wanted. And, and this time is the most humiliating place. So, good point. I don't think you would have. So then in Genesis 40:15, Joseph interprets a dream, and these guys are getting out, and he says, hey, wait a minute. Just make sure, man, you remember me when things are going well for you again, and tell Pharaoh about me, because I need to get out of here. Since I've been here, I literally have done nothing wrong. And Joseph hadn't done anything wrong or deserved to be there.
Yep.
And the cupbearer, once he left, the Bible says, but the cupbearer never gave Joseph another thought. He forgot all about him. This really resonated with me, because there's often times in our life where we feel like we've been looked over, or we looked at another person to try to help us get out of a situation.
Yeah.
And it just made me think about how many times have I felt like God has forgotten me in that. So one example would be, I've been working on this app, this for anybody that's listening, it's been a process, and I literally know nothing about apps. And so I got some help, but I started relying on an individual who started mentoring me to help me get out of a situation. And when my investor called, I needed to deliver something, but wasn't able to, because that individual was in the hospital. So the Lord led me to who is an individual who's now partnering with us, who is absolutely awesome, and I'm going to do more projects with. But the fact that the Lord showed me is that I was depending on someone else other than him to provide a solution.
Yep.
And in that, Joseph, and in my own personal instance, Joseph, if he had been freed at that moment, when when Pharaoh has this dream just a couple years later, Joseph may not have been accessible. Who knows what the family would have done or how things would have turned out if the cupbearer had remembered.
That's a good point.
So in that instance, I never would have gotten to the point, if that guy hadn't been in the hospital. I had, again, a tragic situation, but the Lord still worked it out for my good.
Yeah.
And I got this partner that's going to be able to help with me on a bunch of other things. Had I never got there, I would not have
Yeah.
had that solution.
And
So
it's interesting for Joseph that delay actually positioned him for what God had. Because I think we look at delays and we think they're an inconvenience. They're keeping us from what God has for us. But I think your point is really accurate, that if he had been freed at that point, he wouldn't have been where he needed to be 2 years later. And so that comes back to, what's your perspective, right? Is your perspective that the delay is you being kept from what God has for you? Or is the delay that's how God is leading you to what he has for you?
that's so good. And that's exactly right. So with Joseph, I wonder, it doesn't even really say, it doesn't say how he felt about it or what happened, but we just know that that 2 years later, the Bible says 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream. Yeah. So bread guy dies. That was not great. So that sucks. But I think too, Joseph was able to tell the truth. Like, here's what really happens. Cupbearer is like, I can only imagine, like, as the cupbearer is overhearing Pharaoh talk about, oh, I had this creepy dream. None of my dream interpreters can figure it out. And the cupbearer being like, oh, crap.
Yep.
Like, I know a dude.
Forgot to do that.
There's this guy. I don't know if he's still down there. Like, I probably should have told you long ago.
Yeah.
And the cupbearer even acknowledges that. He said, I should have told you this long ago.
Yeah.
But also sometimes I wonder, like, the Lord calls to remembrance and even helps us, I think, at times forget things that for his purpose and is in his intended time.
Yeah.
He positions us again where we need to be. So the cupbearer is like, hey, I know a dude. So Pharaoh sends for him at once. So right away. So then I think this is important too, because it's like, are we prepared for when we are called?
Yeah.
And in these moments too, Joseph never was like, oh, hey, pick me. I want to be your head slave. Oh, hey, pick me. I want to be in charge of the whole operation of the prison. Oh, hey, pick me. Literally, people are calling him to those positions. Yeah. And in those positions, I think about perspective before we get on into when he gets in the palace. When he was managing things for Potiphar, he learned how to handle all household affairs. He learned how to do business. He learned how to delegate. He learned how to do all of these things. And in the prison, I think about that setting. He's taking care of people in a social service. Are they eating? Are they well? Are they all of the things that you need to be taking care of people? So he was doing operations, really, I think, with Pharaoh or with Potiphar. And then in the prison, he was learning people. Yeah. In a sense. Really so good.
Yeah, he was Joseph leadership skills along the way that would come into play soon. Yeah.
Exactly. So then the preparation part, I think, is good. He's cut his hair, he put on clean clothes, and he came to Pharaoh. So I think that was interesting to me and stuck out to me because recently the Lord has been talking to me a lot about my health. And saying, okay, so I used to drink like 5 or 6 Red Bulls a day. Not that I don't already have energy, but that's a problem.
Yeah. And you talked so fast when you did that. I can barely keep up now, but it was so fast. Right. Yeah. Bad. So I'm actually glad you've laid off the Red Bull because I can interpret you now.
Oh, thank you for that. That's good. I think also my heart doesn't I wonder what, like, it was like beat or skip a beat. I didn't even know. And my brother was like, you could die. And I'm like, oh, that's the thing. But again, I also justified, I used to do a lot of drugs. So I'm like, at least it wasn't drugs, but my personality is addictive. So anyway, cut back on Red Bull. I still drink coffee. I really love coffee. I don't necessarily need it, but I really enjoy it. But the Lord also started talking to me about my health. So I needed to start getting more active and eating healthier and just caring for myself a little bit more. Cause he's like, how could I ever give you more if I can't trust you with what you have?
Yeah.
And good. Also you need to be representing me well.
Yep.
So how do we present ourselves? Not in a vain way, but are we presenting what God would want us to present? So Joseph, again, he cuts his hair, he gets on clean clothes, and he comes before Pharaoh. So he's prepared. He's looking the part. He's done all the hard heart work. And now he's done the outward work. So
that's good.
Joseph gets released from the prison. And I wonder, the question that prompted me after that was, is anybody in a prison right now that is preparing them for their palace? And again, that perspective of what are you doing with your prison moments?
That's really good.
I mean,
And we have every indication that Joseph continued to be faithful day in and day out
right.
with his prison responsibilities. And even after he was forgotten and he felt forgotten and probably wondered, I mean, he's still got in the back of his mind this dream that God gave him, this promise.
Yeah.
And yet it seems like every time he takes a step forward, it's really 2 steps backwards, which to the world, it looks like 2 steps backwards. Now we know, because we know the end of the story, that whenever it looks like you're taking 2 steps backwards, often that is God advancing you. And I think that's very true in our lives. We both experienced that. But it really is interesting to me that for those 2 years, we have every indication that he just stuck with it and he just trusted God and he got up every day and he did his very best. And you're right. So a lot of people, and you and I both felt this way at times, we feel like you're stuck in a prison and there's delay. The question is, how are you stewarding that? Because I think you alluded to this a minute ago, that God wants to trust us with more. And a lot of times he's watching us in the season that we're in to see if we're trustworthy for more. And he allows us to go through things. I think he allowed Joseph to be thrown in a pit so he could test his character and develop his character. He allowed him to be thrown in prison so he could test his character and develop his character even more, so that God knew, like you said, he could trust him when he gets into the palace. So really good stuff. All right, keep going.
Yeah, so that's so good. And to your point, where we're talking about, you know, what are you doing to steward that? The Lord's been putting that a lot on my heart too. So again, that's even with my health, like what am I doing with my time? All of those things. I absolutely love that. And I think too, as leaders, it's particularly important for us to make sure that we're stewarding our own selves and lives well, so that we can steward for others well. Now, another thing that the Lord has also been showing me was, you know, am I the source? Am I the source? So we look back, and in the first dream, Joseph is like, hey guys, I had this dream. This is my dream, mine. The more that the Lord trusts you with, and as you said, is developing you, he wants to know, who's this credit going to? Who is the source of all of the goodness and the favor and all of it. So Joseph goes, and he is in Genesis 41:16. And I will say, the boss that I was dealing with took credit for everybody else's work, took credit for everything. And that's one of the most defeating things ever. Yeah. But also in that time I got blamed for everything that went wrong. So it was like, okay. But the Lord also talked to me because Secretary of Labor came and recognized my program as a big deal, and like it was in the paper and stuff. Okay. So
you're kind of a big deal.
It was kind of cool. Yeah. But I was so offended at the time that I wasn't invited to the table to even discuss what I had essentially built in that time. That was my mind frame. And the Lord dealt with me, and he dealt with my heart. And many times I notice as well, as the Lord won't ever allow you to really blame anybody else. He's going to say, what are you going to do about it?
That's right.
So at that moment, the Lord was like, listen to me. Who are you doing this work for? Who really gets all the credit?
That's good. That's really good.
And that, I think, also prepared me for some future things that I've walked out and am living in now, that really it doesn't matter who gets credit humanly. Yeah. At the end of the day, we do our work for God, and that's who gets the credit. So Joseph, again, he shows up, and in Genesis 41:16, so Pharaoh says, can you interpret my dream? And Joseph answered, not I, but God. God will set the Pharaoh's mind at ease. So at this point, the first dream didn't acknowledge that it was God. The 2 dreams when he was 17 at that time. So I did a little tracking of Joseph's timeline, and something like just blew my mind. He was 17 when all that happened. He was 28. So that's 11 years. He has this dream interpretation. Now, did Joseph have any dreams in between? I don't know. It doesn't say. Right. But he never lost the ability. And he acknowledges God, but in that instance, looked to man to help him out of his situation. So I feel like we took a step. We're acknowledging God, but I'm still going to rely on somebody else to get me out of this.
Yeah.
At this point, there's no expectation from Joseph. So 2 years afterwards, he's 30. So this is cool to me, 30, and I'm about to be 30 here in July. So that's really cool. But he acknowledges God. And then he didn't have an expectation or ask for Pharaoh to give him or provide him with anything or free me after this dream. There was nothing. There was no expectation. Here's what it is. And I think Joseph in those 2 years just learned, like, God is whatever God says, it just is, you know. And to your point, he remembered the promise.
Yep.
When did that expectation of it'll be fulfilled? When it's fulfilled.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that's really freeing as well.
Well, and I think it allowed him to do that with, like you said, with no strings attached, because he wasn't looking to Pharaoh to be the solution to his problem. And so it allows us to serve unfair bosses, to have integrity in situations that are hard, when we see that really the one that we're pleasing is God. It allows us to trust that. So good.
So this was interesting to me. Joseph was commissioned when he was 30. So I think about lots of maturing between 17 and 30, because he's given the dream when he's 17. Everybody's going to bow down to you. And he's like, oh, that's awesome. And has some twists and turns. But I also look at who else was commissioned when they were 30. David. In 2 Samuel 3:4, it says that David was 30 years old when he became king and ruled for 40 years. Now, I did a little research and couldn't find an exact date, but essentially David was also anointed as king when he was like 14.
Yeah.
But wasn't appointed and commissioned till he was 30.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of maturing that happened. So both of these guys had promises. Now, Jesus also, Luke 3:23, when Jesus entered public life, he was about 30 years old. Jesus knew from the time he was very young that he was going to save the world.
Right.
But there's a lot of maturing that had to happen.
That's right.
So to that point, I told my husband that today. I was like, oh my gosh, look at what I found. And he's like, are you saying this because you're about to be 30? I'm like, I'm saying it because it's Bible truth, but I'm just saying I'm looking forward to 30.
I did have someone tell me when I turned 30 that my 30s would be better than my 20s, and that has held true. So I hope that your 30s are even better than that, though. That's awesome.
I hope so too. So I'm excited. So anyway, now let's say we're in the palace. Pharaoh's had this dream about this, lots of plenty, tons of years of plenty, 7 years of greatness, and then 7 years of horribleness. So famine strikes the land, and he has this dream. And then Joseph says, hey, my recommendation is that you get somebody with some experience and some wisdom that can manage this for you, to make sure that you're stewarding things well in a time of plenty. So there's more than enough in the time of famine.
That's really good.
And Pharaoh looks around at his guys and he's like, well, I mean, I don't see anybody else that is going to be able to do this, and says, well, Joseph, I think you're our man.
Yeah.
And that kind of caught my eye too, because I feel as though there's times when people are appointed and we don't understand why. And our perspective is like, why them?
Yeah.
And I think about all the folks that had served Pharaoh well, who had done excellent work, who had been loyal and had the experience. And for Pharaoh just to say, well, nobody else even comes close to matching you.
Yeah.
Part of me was like, I don't know. I would have felt a little salty about that. And there's been times in my life where I didn't get promotions. I didn't get the job I wanted. And I felt a little salty about it because that should have been me.
Yep.
But the thing that differentiates Joseph, he came out right and just said, God is why. He's going to be the one that's going to ease things for you.
Yeah.
And then God favored him. And so God's favor will get you places regardless of your age, regardless of your experience, regardless of
That's so good.
Whatever. So that really, really stuck out to me. Now, what also is fascinating, so the years of famine come along, and this is 20 plus years in the making, when Joseph gets to see his family again. And again, the famine, and I even think about our experience right now with COVID-19 going on. What is what is being forced in a sense? How are we stewarding even this time in disaster? But his dad hears about the supplies that are available and sends his brothers. And I also was thinking about, like, Joseph was kind of running the first FEMA. Like, literally, I was like, whoa, like, that's that model. We've got the resources, we got the supplies, you know. So that's just a little tidbit. But Joseph was running the country. This is Genesis 39, 42, 6 through 7. Joseph was running the country. He was the one who gave out rations to all the people. When Joseph's brothers arrived, they treated him with honor, bowing to him.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go into all of that transpire, but the fact is that the dream came true.
Yeah.
And Joseph was not only able to save an entire nation, he was able to save the ones he loved the most. And I think about also Joseph having to go up and then down, and then up and then down, up and then down. And the Lord needed to get to a place where I'm sure 17-year-old Joseph, it had been just a year later, he'd have been like, slam! Take him out!
Right. That's right.
And the Lord had to get him to a place where he would respond with, I mean, the Bible talks about he just wept with joy because he was reunited. And so that piece, I think, also a true measure of leadership and even just that testing and pruning that the Lord does is that, can you even love and have grace for the ones that meant to harm and kill you? And I know there's been situations in your life where you've been severely hurt by people that you thought were your family, you know, and the Lord has to get us to a place to know that, you know what, even the Lord.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, so I don't know, those are just some of the observations that I had. And it really is all about perspective, because are we at a place where the Lord can trust us, and are we going to take his perspective on situations? And I'll just kind of recap. So I had that rough boss. I ended up having to have a lawyer involved and be able to learn how to document things, be able to learn how to make sure things were taken care of in an HR perspective. And the first job that I had, so I applied for a job for a promotion with the organization, and that boss sat in on that interview. I didn't get the job. It was a Tuesday. I got notified Thursday. She turned in her keys and quit and tried to sue the organization on Friday. Then a week later, I got a phone call about a consulting job that led me to a lot more money and a situation where there was a terrible boss there that had been there for a long time. And I knew exactly how to help coach employees to make sure they were documenting things. I was able to ensure that, I mean, in her leadership, people were having heart attacks. I mean, their health was in seriously, you know, and the Lord just showed me, had you not been through all of that, would you have been able to come in and take care of that? Within 1 week, that woman was fired. She tried to come back a few months later to do an EEO claim, and it was denied. And so the Lord just showed me, like, if I hadn't put you through all of that, would you have been able, within 1 week, it took me a year to be able to do what needed to be done.
Right.
And so again, it just goes to show those steps back and that promotion that I didn't get, and those times when Joseph was forgotten, like, what is the Lord really preparing you for?
That's right. That's right.
So that's
so good.
Now I am in a manager position. So I'm consulting and advising some presidents and flying around the nation. That's really awesome. Then I have this opportunity to maybe come back and be a manager at the organization that I experienced all that stuff with. And the Lord just, he humbled me, and he was like, you need to go back. Now I think about this even right now, I wouldn't be flying and wouldn't have a job if I had chosen not to come back. But also, he's been teaching me some stuff, because here's the thing, it's just a journey. I had an experience with an individual, another leader, and the Lord's like, this is why I brought you back. You need to learn how to submit to authority.
Yeah. That's a hard one.
So again, it's a journey. I'm not there yet. I'm still learning so much. And, you know, I feel fortunate because I've got like you, I've got Sarah, I've got Emily, I have people and my husband, you know, I've got people who are pouring into me and surrounding me. And I think about, we have that connection as Christians. Joseph was a Hebrew in a foreign land. Other people didn't believe like him. He didn't have community like that. I mean, it doesn't talk about any of that. So how much more isolating or challenging would it be when I can pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, I'm feeling discouraged.
That's right.
So I think surrounding yourself with people who can pour life into you and speak God's perspective is super important. So
yeah, no, that's so good. And one thing I love about your story, like you said, you're still in progress in your story, and I am too, is just how redemptive God has already been with so many of those things, that he's allowed what you went through to turn around and bless others and to set others free. We've talked a lot about that any hardship you go through, God wants to turn around and use that for a redemptive purpose. And that was true for Joseph. It was redemptive for him to bless his family. And I think if anything, we want to encourage our listeners or our viewers just to know that God is going to redeem your situation. And also, I think we've talked so many times about how we have had to go through really unfair situations. We've both been slandered. We've had our integrity questioned when it didn't need to be. We've both been through so many unfair things, but it just seems like in the kingdom of God that for God to trust you with big things, you have to go through those kinds of situations. So we just want to encourage you, whatever season you're in, maybe you are in a pit, maybe you're in a prison, maybe you're in a palace. God is working on your behalf. He has not overlooked you. He has not forgotten you. And every single thing that you're going through, he is not going to waste any of it. He's going to use it for his redemptive purposes. So any final thoughts, Krista?
No, that's just so good. I think, again, you hit the nail on the head. It's like the Lord, what the enemy intends to bring you down, the Lord uses for his purpose and his glory. And I guess the last thing I would say is that, like, what the Lord delivers you from, you become a deliverer of.
That's right.
And David, Joseph, Jesus, like, literally in leadership, I think that's a big thing. We should be delivering.
Yes.
And so, yeah, this is awesome. I just appreciate the opportunity to connect with you. And again, just encourage folks. I guess the last words would be, when you need that encouragement, find those people, find the folks that can get around you and surround you and help that perspective shift.
Yes.
Because sometimes people get around you and they'll be like, no, it is awful. It sucks. It's the worst. It's terrible. Now, there's times where I need that. Just God's like 10 minutes, 5 minutes back. Now get back on track. So again, just make sure you're around people with the perspective of the Lord. I know you've called me many times and you're just like, why? And how is this? And you're like, I hate that you're saying this to me right now. I'm sorry, man. I love you. So just be encouraged and thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Krista. Appreciate your time.